Welcome to today's deep dive. If you've ever wondered how a civilization can build one of the most magnificent, awe-inspiring structures in human history, only to, watch it become the exact center of their own total destruction, well, you are in the right place today.
Yeah, you really are. I'm excited for this one.
We have a massive stack of historical material on the table today. We're talking archaeological records, ancient Near East chronologies, and some really deep commentaries on biblical texts, specifically 1st and 2nd Kings, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel.
Right, which is a lot to get through, but the narrative in there is just incredible.
It really is. And our mission today is to cut through all those dense ancient timelines to extract the absolute most fascinating nuggets about the rise, the tragic fall, and the eventual sort of miraculous resurrection of Solomon's temple.
Which is, it's arguably one of the most famous structures ever built.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because we are talking about a building that, if you adjust for modern currency, cost billions of dollars to build.
Billions.
Yeah.
The VB.
Yeah, a megastructure constructed without a single hammer being heard on site, which ultimately triggered a massive geopolitical and spiritual collapse.
It really is one of the most epic narratives in recorded history. Because when we look at these historical accounts, we aren't just looking at the blueprints of a building, right? We are looking at the architectural manifestation of a nation's soul.
Ooh, I like that. The architectural manifestation of a nation's soul.
Yeah, and to understand the eventual collapse of that soul, we have to start at the absolute peak of their golden age. According to the chronological records, construction began around 966 BC.
So we hear this was a massive project. But in modern terms, what kind of wealth are we actually talking about here? How rich was this golden age, really?
Honestly, it's mind-boggling. If we look at the historical measurements provided in the texts, the gold alone used to overlay the interior of the temple would be worth over $2.5 billion today.
$2.5 billion, just in gold.
Just the gold. And that is a highly conservative estimate because it's often calculated using an incredibly outdated valuation of just $35 per ounce.
Oh, wow. So if you'd adjust that for today's gold prices.
Exactly. The wealth concentrated in this one building in Jerusalem is almost unfathomable. The entire interior, from the floors to the carved ceilings, was overlaid with pure gold.
That is just a staggering amount of wealth sitting in one single location. But honestly, the detail from the historical accounts that completely stopped me in my tracks wasn't the gold. It was about the construction site itself, the silence of it.
Yes, the silence of the builders. It's a true logistical masterpiece. The texts explicitly record that this massive structure was built using colossal limestone blocks, but there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard on the site while it was being built.
How do you even pull that off? Building a multi-billion-dollar megastructure in total silence.
Through intense, highly coordinated offsite engineering. Every single stone was pre-cut, shaped, and perfectly fitted at a quarry miles away.
So they were essentially creating ancient, giant, interlocking puzzle pieces.
That's exactly it. Then they were transported to the site on Mount Moriah to be assembled quietly. But the historical texts highlight this for a very specific reason.
Right, it wasn't just a gimmick.
No, the quiet construction reflected the deep reverence and the ultimate spiritual purpose of the building. It wasn't just a palace for a king. In their theology, it was designed to be the literal dwelling place of the divine on earth.
The Holy of Holies.
Right. The innermost room, the Holy of Holies, was built specifically to house the Ark of the Covenant, which was the sacred golden chest containing the 10 Commandments. Because it was a place of absolute holy peace, the noise of human industry, of chiseling and hacking.
It was deemed completely inappropriate for the space.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense conceptually, but to pull off that kind of logistical miracle, King Solomon couldn't do it alone. The historical records detail this fascinating geopolitical partnership he struck up with King Hiram of Tyre, which is located in modern-day Lebanon.
That's right. Tyre was a very wealthy maritime trading hub, and Hiram had access to resources and expertise that Solomon desperately needed. He provided the famous cedars of Lebanon, which were highly prized because their bitter sap naturally repelled insects and prevented decay.
Which is perfect for a structure you want to last forever.
Exactly. He also sent master artisans and bronze workers to craft the intricate pillars and furnishings.
But the payment arrangement they came up with is actually hilarious. In exchange for all this premium timber and engineering expertise, Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the region of Galilee.
A huge real estate transfer.
Yeah, but the records show Hiram went down to inspect his new real estate, absolutely hated them, and named the region Kabul, which in Hebrew basically translates to good for nothing.
It's a great historical anecdote, but if we read between the lines, it also hints at the economic strain happening behind the scenes. Solomon is giving away actual territory to pay his building debts.
Right, he's mortgaging the country.
Yeah, and that brings us to the human cost of this golden era, which had a much darker side. To build at this scale, Solomon instituted a massive system of conscripted labor. The ancient records show he drafted 30,000 Israelites.
Wow.
They worked on a grueling rotation. 1 month hauling timber up in Lebanon and then 2 months back home.
Which I suppose doesn't sound terrible until you look at the rest of the workforce required to move those colossal stones.
Precisely. Because on top of those 30,000 citizens, the royal administration employed 150,000 transporters and stonecutters, overseen by nearly 4,000 foremen.
It's an entire army of laborers.
It really was. And the archaeological and biblical accounts point out that he utilized forced slave labor from the remaining Canaanite tribes in the region. The Israelite labor force was managed by a specific overseer named Adoniram, who became so deeply resented by the working class that it would eventually spark a national crisis.
So the staggering wealth we just talked about was built entirely on the backs of brutal taxation and forced labor. But at the time, all that tension was seemingly hidden behind the sheer glory of the finished product. The project took 7.5 years to complete, finishing around 959 BC.
And the dedication ceremony they threw.
Oh, it is hard to wrap your head around. The texts record that they sacrificed 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep over a 14-day national feast. This was the moment that the Ark of the Covenant was finally brought into the Holy of Holies.
It was the absolute zenith of their civilization.
Which begs the question, how does a nation go from that absolute peak, from a literal golden age, to utter, devastating ash?
It happened slowly and then all at once. The turning point, according to the historical and biblical commentaries, actually begins with Solomon himself. Despite his historical reputation for supreme wisdom, his geopolitical strategies directly planted the seeds of his own downfall.
Right, the alliances.
He cemented foreign alliances the old-fashioned way, through marriage. He accumulated a famously massive royal harem of 700 wives and 300 concubines.
Which is just wild to think about logistically.
Oh, definitely. And to appease these foreign princesses, he built high places and shrines for their national gods, like Chemosh and Molech, right on the hills overlooking the very temple he had just built to the God of Israel.
He essentially imported and state-sponsored the exact practices his culture was strictly forbidden from doing.
Exactly.
And after Solomon died around 931 BC, all that underlying tension we talked about earlier, the heavy taxation, the forced labor, the deep-seated resentment toward overseers like Adoniram, it completely tore the nation apart.
It fractured the whole society.
Right. The kingdom fractured into two. You had the northern kingdom called Israel, which took 10 of the tribes, and the southern kingdom called Judah, which kept Jerusalem and the temple, consisting of just 2 tribes.
What's fascinating here is the psychological and spiritual trap that the southern kingdom of Judah fell into over the next few centuries. Scholars analyzing these historical texts refer to it as the temple fetish or the talisman effect.
Wait, temple fetish? That sounds like a contradiction for a highly religious society. What does that actually mean in this context?
Essentially, the kings and the citizens of Judah began to believe that because God's literal magnificent house was located inside their city walls, Jerusalem was completely invincible.
I see.
They developed this false, highly dangerous theology that God would never allow his own house to be destroyed, no matter how corrupt the society around it became. It functioned like a magic talisman.
Like a lucky rabbit's foot on a national scale.
Exactly. So they went through all the motions and rituals of their religion, sacrificing the animals, burning the incense, singing the psalms, while simultaneously living in deep moral corruption, embracing idolatry, and ignoring blatant social injustice.
It became a dead religion.
Yes, the building itself became an idol.
And the craziest part is that they were explicitly warned. The prophetic accounts show that figures like Jeremiah and Ezekiel were practically screaming from the rooftops to wake them up.
Yes, the prophet saw right through it.
Jeremiah specifically pointed to an ancient site called Shiloh. For the listener who might not know, Shiloh was where the original tabernacle, the tent that housed the ark before the temple was built, had been located centuries earlier. And God allowed Shiloh to be completely destroyed because of the people's corruption.
Right, the precedent was already there.
Exactly. Jeremiah was standing in the temple courtyard, pointing to history, trying to prove to them, look, this building will not save you if your actions are rotten.
But the leadership had completely lost its way. The historical chronicles describe a succession of wicked kings in Judah that pushed the nation past the point of no return. King Manasseh, for example, didn't just tolerate foreign gods on the surrounding hills. He actually built pagan altars right inside the courtyards of Solomon's temple.
Inside the courtyards?
Yes. And the records even state he participated in the horrific practice of child sacrifice in the Hinnom Valley just outside the city walls.
So the moral rot is complete at this point. King Jehoiakim is another prime example. He was a bloodthirsty tyrant. The texts describe a moment where he is sitting by his winter fire and someone reads him the prophetic scrolls of Jeremiah warning of coming judgment.
And what does he do?
Instead of listening, Jehoiakim arrogantly takes a scribe's knife, cuts the scrolls into pieces, and burns them in the fire.
That supreme arrogance perfectly sets the stage for the geopolitical reality that was brewing right outside his borders. For a long time, the dominant world power had been Assyria, which had already conquered and destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel.
Right, the other half of the split kingdom.
Exactly. But Assyria was crumbling, and a new terrifying superpower was rising from Mesopotamia. Babylon, led by the brilliant and ruthless military tactician, King Nebuchadnezzar. Judah found itself caught right in the geopolitical crossfire between Babylon to the north and Egypt to the south.
So while Jehoiakim is burning scrolls in his winter palace, ignoring the warnings, the map of the ancient world is violently shifting. And the Babylonian conquest doesn't happen overnight. It's a brutal, drawn-out process over 3 separate sieges. Can you walk us through how this slow-motion collapse actually unfolded?
Absolutely. Let's start with siege number 1. In 605 BC, Babylon decisively defeats the Egyptian army at the massive Battle of Carchemish, establishing dominance over the region. Nebuchadnezzar then marches his army straight to Jerusalem.
Just shows up at the gates.
He basically corners King Jehoiakim and forces Judah to become a vassal state. That means they get to keep a king on the throne, but they are essentially a puppet government paying massive mafia-style protection money to Babylon.
Hefty tribute.
Very heavy. During this first siege, Nebuchadnezzar takes the absolute brightest and best from the nobility as hostages back to Babylon. This is when the famous historical figure Daniel is taken. He also plunders some of the golden vessels from the temple to put in a Babylonian museum as trophies.
So they lose their independence, they lose their best minds, and they lose some of their sacred artifacts, all in round 1.
Correct. And from a timeline perspective, our historical analysis points out that this specific event in 605 BC kicks off a highly significant, prophesied 70-year period known as the servitude of the nation.
Okay, the 70 years.
It marks the beginning of Judah's subjugation to Babylon. And this wasn't just a random punishment. According to their own ancient laws, the land was supposed to rest every 7 years, a Sabbath year where no crops were planted.
Oh, right.
The nation had ignored this law for 490 years. So 70 years of exile was essentially calculated payback. It was literally the land taking back its missed rest.
Wow, so the 70 years is a theological countdown clock based on centuries of unpaid debt. That's fascinating. But even with the brightest minds deported and the heavy tribute, the leadership in Jerusalem just couldn't accept their new reality, could they?
Not at all. 8 years later, in 597 BC, we get siege number 2. Jehoiakim foolishly decides to stop paying tribute and rebels against Babylon. He ends up dead.
Not a great move.
No. His son, Jehoiachin, who is only 18 years old, takes the throne and immediately has to deal with Nebuchadnezzar's returning army. Think of the cultural shock for this teenager. He surrenders after just 3 months.
I can't even imagine.
This time, Nebuchadnezzar isn't messing around. He inflicts a massive brain drain on the city. He deports 10,000 captives, stripping out the entire military, the skilled craftsmen, the artisans, and another major prophet, Ezekiel.
So the city is gutted.
Completely gutted. He strips even more of the temple's gold and installs the former king's uncle, a man named Zedekiah, to be his new puppet king. Nebuchadnezzar assumes he has crippled the city enough that they will finally submit, leaving only the poorest and weakest behind.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, deeply tragic. Zedekiah is now in charge of a severely depleted city. He's watched his nephew get deported, he's seen the city stripped of its wealth and talent, and he has the prophet Jeremiah explicitly telling him, do not fight Babylon, it is a divine judgment. Surrender and live. Yet, heavily influenced by nobles who falsely believe an alliance with Egypt will save them, Zedekiah rebels. He stops paying tribute. And Nebuchadnezzar, who has now had to march his army to this troublesome city for a third time, decides he is going to wipe it off the map completely.
This is siege number 3, running from 588 to 586 BC. And the primary accounts describing this final siege are absolutely harrowing. Nebuchadnezzar's army built siege walls entirely around Jerusalem, cutting off all food, water, and supplies for 18 grueling months.
18 months with nothing coming in.
The psychological terror and starvation inside the city walls reached apocalyptic levels. The Book of Lamentations and the records of Jeremiah detail a famine so severe that the people lost all humanity. The eyewitness accounts explicitly report that mothers were driven by madness and starvation to boil and eat their own children.
It's just horrific.
Disease ran rampant. The dead were simply piled in the streets.
Finally, in July of 586 BC, the unthinkable happens. The walls of Jerusalem are breached. The Babylonian army floods into the starting city. King Zedekiah tries to flee through a secret gate by the royal gardens under the cover of night, but he doesn't make it far. He's captured in the plains near Jericho and brought before Nebuchadnezzar.
And this moment provides a fascinating look at the prophetic texts, which seem to contain a glaring contradiction.
Right, the two prophecies.
Prior to this capture, Jeremiah had prophesied that Zedekiah would speak with the king of Babylon face to face and be taken to Babylon. But the prophet Ezekiel, speaking from exile hundreds of miles away, prophesied that Zedekiah would be brought to Babylon, but he would never see it.
It sounds like a complete paradox. How can you go to a city but never see it?
The historical reality fulfilled both prophecies perfectly in the most gruesome way possible. Nebuchadnezzar forces Zedekiah to watch as his own sons are slaughtered right in front of him.
Oh.
And then, once that horrific image is burned into Zedekiah's mind as the last thing he will ever see, Nebuchadnezzar has Zedekiah's eyes put out. He blinds him. They bind him in bronze chains and march him to Babylon. He went to Babylon, he died in Babylon, but he never saw it.
It is a chilling, brutal fulfillment of the texts. With the king dealt with, Nebuchadnezzar sends his captain of the guard, a man named Nebuzaradan, back to Jerusalem a month later in August of 586 BC to finish the job. His orders are total, uncompromising destruction.
They didn't just conquer the city, they erased it. Nebuzaradan sets fire to the royal palace, he burns down the houses of the nobility, and then he takes the torch to Solomon's temple.
The ultimate tragedy.
That billion-dollar marvel of cedar and gold, the building where the divine was supposed to dwell, the structure they believed made them invincible, is completely engulfed in flames. Then, the Babylonian army physically breaks down the massive stone walls of Jerusalem, pushing the rubble into the surrounding valleys. The ultimate symbol of their identity is reduced to ash.
And just like that, the golden age is over.
Yes, and this cataclysmic event kicks off a second, overlapping 70-year timeline tracked by historians, known as the Desolations of Jerusalem.
Right, so we have the servitude timeline and now the desolations timeline.
Exactly. The city is left as a wasteland. The remaining population is exiled to Babylon, forced to live in a foreign pagan culture. They leave behind only the absolute poorest vine dressers and farmers to work the land. For decades, the site of Solomon's magnificent temple is just a scorched ruin. Think about the psychological state of those exiles. They have lost their homes, their king, their holy city, and the physical center of their entire belief system.
But the story doesn't end in the ashes. Fast forward through decades of exile in Babylon. The geopolitical wheel turns again. In 539 BC, the seemingly invincible Babylonian Empire falls practically overnight to the Persians, led by Cyrus the Great.
A major shift in world power.
Huge.
Yeah.
And Cyrus brings a completely different management style to the empire. Instead of deporting conquered peoples and destroying their local gods, his policy is surprisingly tolerant. He figures it is better to send them home to pray for him.
It is an incredible reversal of fortune. The historical calendar of Cyrus confirms that in 538 BC, he issues a formal decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. He even goes into the Babylonian vaults and hands back those sacred gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen decades earlier.
So the exiles journey back, but they are returning to a city that is just a heap of rubble overgrown with weeds. Under the leadership of men like Zerubbabel, and spurred on by the urgent messages of the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, they clear the ash and start laying a new foundation. Finally, in 516 BC, the second temple is completed and dedicated.
And note the timeline there. The first temple was destroyed in 586 BC. The second temple is completed in 516 BC.
That's exactly 70 years.
It was exactly 70 years of desolation, precisely as the ancient texts had predicted. However, the dedication of this new temple was a deeply bittersweet moment. The accounts in the book of Ezra describe a very poignant scene. As the foundation was laid, the younger generation, who had only known exile and were thrilled to finally have a national home, shouted for joy.
But the older people, the ones who had survived the terrible siege, the ones who still carried the childhood memories of the unimaginable scale, the blinding gold, the sheer glory of Solomon's original temple. The texts say they wept loudly.
It must have been overwhelming.
They cried with such a booming, heartbroken voice that from a distance you couldn't tell the difference between the shouts of joy and the sounds of weeping. The new building, while a miracle of survival, was incredibly modest compared to what they had lost.
It was a profound visual reminder of the cost of their history. They had their homeland back, and they had a functional temple again, but the scars of the Babylonian conquest were permanent. They had learned the hard way that their structures were not invincible.
So what does this all mean? Why does this ancient, dusty history of a building matter to you today? Because it is an absolute masterclass in the dangers of the temple fetish. It is human nature to place our ultimate confidence in our past successes, in our massive structures, in our inherited institutions. We look at the billions of dollars, the grand architecture, the prestigious history, and we think we are untouchable.
But that's the illusion.
Exactly. The moment we put our faith in the external structure, while completely neglecting the core values, the integrity, and the moral behaviors that built it in the first place, we are already collapsing from the inside out.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it changes how we view security entirely. True resilience isn't found in unbreakable walls, or in stockpiles of gold, or in the silent, perfect precision of limestone blocks. Those things can all be breached and burned by the next rising empire.
They always are, eventually.
Right. True resilience is found in adaptability. It's found in maintaining the integrity of your identity and your core beliefs, even when the walls fall and you are carried away in chains.
Which leaves us with a lingering mystery, something pulled directly from the contrast in these historical accounts. Think back to the divided kingdom we discussed earlier. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by Assyria in 722 BC. They were deported, scattered, and entirely absorbed into foreign cultures.
They were completely erased from history.
Known forever as the Lost 10 Tribes. They simply vanished. Yet the southern kingdom of Judah faced an even more systematic, brutal destruction. They watched their holy city burned, their sacred temple reduced to ash, and they were exiled to the heart of Babylon.
But somehow they managed to maintain their identity in exile.
Yes, they held on to their text, their culture, and they survived to return and rebuild. What is the invisible glue that allows one culture to survive the total, absolute loss of its physical home, while another simply vanishes into the sands of time? That is something for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends.
End of this episode. Stay tuned for the next.